Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Oxfordshire Growth Board Scrutiny Panel on Thursday, the 28th of May. I'm going to turn to item 1 on the agenda, which is the election of chair for the panel for the 2021 year. If I could seek some nominations, I'm going to stop speaking now.
I would like to nominate Councillor Andrew Gant for chair, please.
Okay, that's Councillor Webber, correct?
Correct.
And John Tanner would like to second him.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other nominations? Councillor sorry, someone's got their hand raised. Councillor Wallace, sorry.
Hello, I think it was Councillor Woodcock who's raised his hand.
I only raised my hand in order to propose Councillor Gant, but it's already been done.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Woodcock.
Kevin, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now. Any other points before? Can I just double check there aren't any other nominations?
No, none.
Okay, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the attendance list, and I'm going to ask each of you to say formally that you agree with the recommendation that.
Kevin, if there's only one nomination, why are we needing to do that?
Just to get the formal affirmation of the meeting. I know in normal circumstances we might be doing it slightly less formally, but I think in these circumstances we do need to sort of, for me to call people in turn. I'll do it as quickly as I can. Okay, Councillor Barber, can I have your vote, please?
Agreed.
Councillor Carter, I can see you're waving, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, Kevin, this is going to take all night. Yes, I agree, but can we not just get people to stick their hands up or something?
We'll do it as fast as we can. Councillor Cook, are you on the call at all?
I am. It's not unmuting. Yes, Councillor Cook, yes, I am. And I agree.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor.
Kevin, you were muted.
Councillor Peter Dragonetti.
I support the nomination of Andrew Gant as chairman.
Thank you. Councillor David Grant, sorry.
Agreed.
Councillor Sarah Gray.
Agreed.
Councillor Damien Hayward.
Agreed.
Councillor Dan Levy.
Agreed.
Councillor Alex Postnan.
Postan, agreed.
Apologies, yeah. Councillor Craig Simmons.
Agreed.
Councillor John Tanner.
Agreed.
Councillor David Turner. Councillor Turner. Okay, I'm going to move on. Councillor Tom Wallace.
Agreed.
Councillor Richard Webber.
Agreed.
Councillor Lucinda Wing,
Agreed.
Councillor Sean Woodcock.
Agreed.
I'll go back to David Turner. Sorry, are you on the call?
Agreed. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Andrew Gannett himself, if he wishes to vote.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Apologies for that. I'm sorry it's a bit long-winded. That being the case, I declared that that Councillor Gannett is the chairman for this municipal year, and I will now hand over to him.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you, colleagues. First item of business is for me to handle the election of the vice chair, and I would like to nominate Councillor Sean Woodcock. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded, John Tanner.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Then, following officer's advice, I will pursue the same procedure that Kevin has just done, and I'm going to read out the names in the order that they're in front of me. So I hope this is all right. So could you just answer agreed or yes or for as you see fit? Councillor Richard.
Agreed. Agreed.
Councillor Damien Hayward.
Agreed.
Councillor Nick Carter.
Yes, agreed.
Councillor Dan Levy.
Agreed.
Councillor Alex Postan.
Agreed.
Councillor Peter Dragonetti.
Agreed.
Councillor David Turner.
Agreed.
Councillor Sarah Gray.
Agreed.
Councillor Lucinda Wing.
Agreed.
Councillor Thomas Wallace.
Agreed.
Councillor John Tanner.
Agreed. My apologies.
Councillor Craig Simmons.
Agreed.
Councillor Matthew Barber.
Agreed.
Councillor David Grant.
Agreed.
Councillor Andy Cook.
Agreed.
And Councillor Sean Woodcock.
Agreed.
Did I miss anybody? That means we have an almost full house turnout, which is fantastic. Well done and welcome everybody. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, Chair's announcements. If I could just very quickly run through some items of the technological and meeting etiquette for this meeting. First of all, please don't use the chat at all, except if you are experiencing technological problems. So if you are dropped out or cut out, use the chat to inform officers of that. If you want to speak, please raise your hand electronically, and if that doesn't work or you don't have it, use the chat to indicate that too. Can you please be responsible for your own mute button and only unmute when you are speaking, bearing in mind that, as Kevin has told us, there is a delay. If we need to agree anything like a recommendation, I'll try and do it by us gathering a consensus. But if we do need to take a vote, we'll do it according to the procedure that we've just had. We might change the order. Councillor Hudspeth is speaking to us and can't join us until 7. So if we've got to his item before that, or he hasn't arrived, we'll go on to the item following that. I hope that's okay. At 8 p.m. tonight is what I believe is the last of the weekly applause for NHS staff and others. So what I'd like to suggest is that we aim to finish the meeting by then. That might be a bit ambitious, but if we can, I'm sure we'd all welcome it. But if not, I'd like to suggest to the meeting that we pause so that we can all take part in that and then reconvene after 5 minutes. Would that be agreeable? You could just indicate the thumb or something.
Agreed.
That sounds like a plan. Okay. And then the final thing I'd like to just mention under Chair's announcements, please, is that I would like to just acknowledge that a huge amount of work has gone into setting this up from our officers, Amit, Kevin, Susan, Stefan, and no doubt others as well. as far as we know, this is the first remote meeting involving cross-council working. I'm prepared to be corrected about that, but nobody could think of one. And others have tried and failed. So we're pioneering here, and I do want to just acknowledge all the hard work and effort that's gone into getting us to this point. And I'd like to suggest that that's sort of formally recorded on behalf of the panel in our minutes. Please, our acknowledge our officers. Thank you very much. Thank you. So that's item 3. Item 4 is the protocol under which we operate. So that's taken as read because it's the protocol of the hosting organisation. There are 1 or 2 small details that don't apply. This meeting is not being live streamed because we're not a statutory committee. We are a panel. So, but we'll adopt that. So that's item 4. Is that okay? Any problems? Any points about that? Okay, thank you. Item 5 is the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments about the accuracy or the wording of the minutes of the last meeting? Seems like a lifetime ago. Alex.
Purely as an observation, the minutes are lengthy as published for the last meeting, and they don't include quotes and verbatim comments. Now that we're live streaming, could we make an effort to shorten the minutes, but to include comments when made by delegates? That's a personal favourite and a request. It's not an order.
Thank you. That will be duly noted by our officers. Craig.
Yes, thank you. Can I also, in line with that recommendation, which I think is an excellent one, can we also put a link to the video in the minutes as well?
I agree with that.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Alex, could you just lower your hand, please? Thank you. So are we content then to agree these minutes as a correct record of our last meeting? Take that as a yes. That's very good news. Good.
Chairman, sorry to interject there.
Yep.
Just one thing I've forgotten, because we've moved on, is about apologies. So I should just formally record the apologies we received. That was under item 3. Sorry for not reminding you.
Well, my fault. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have apologies from Councillor Hayley Gascoigne, who is being substituted by Councillor Grant. We have apologies from Councillor Derek Cotterill, who doesn't have a substitute. We have apologies from Councillor Ted Fenton, who is being subbed by Councillor Pusnan. We have apologies from Councillor Julian Cooper, who's been subbed by Councillor Dan Levy. And as you might have mentioned, I think Councillor Matt Barber may need to leave early. I think that's all of them, but please correct me, people, if I've missed any.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Apologies for missing that out under item 3. I'm just keeping an eye just to make sure I don't miss any hands going up. I see none. Good. So we're on to item 6 on our agenda, which is public participation. And although this is unusual, we are, I think, keen to encourage public participation and have invited members of the public to contribute. But on this occasion, nobody's taken the bait, so we don't have any. I think that's correct. Officers could just confirm.
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay. So we move on to item 7, which is the report back on recommendations. So I just wanted to remind members of the panel about this because it all seems such a long time ago. Page 22 on our agenda. I'm just trying to find it myself now. They were all agreed as yeses, and I just wanted to refer briefly, if I may, just to a couple of points. In recommendation 1, we we flagged up our support for the principle set out in the Declaration of Ambition to support the aims of the government's 25-year environment plan. One of the threads and themes coming through both this panel and the Growth Board is putting the environment high up the list of priorities. So that's good. Recommendation 2 is about representation on governance structures within the ARC. Clearly, this is something that is evolving, and our recommendation was framed in a deliberately inclusive way to say the Growth Board representation within formal governance structures, without, of course, knowing what those structures are, should remain reserved for elected councillors. The answer is yes, but it then says the Growth Board also wishes to see that LEPs and universities are represented on this executive as well, which is an answer to a slightly different question. So it means that yes, elected councillors will be on that representing the Growth Board, but other representatives will be there too. Then the recommendation 6 was about timings within the Oxfordshire plan, and we'll come back to that later on under Bev's report at item 9. So does anybody have any comments or questions about our recommendations? Councillor David Grant.
Sorry, it's just taking a few seconds to unmute, but yeah, on recommendation 2, now this might be slightly my own misunderstanding just because it's the first time I've been on this committee as I'm subbing in, but it seems to me that recommendation 2, it says yes, but then the actual answer is no, because surely that was about making sure that all the people on the executive were democratically accountable, and it was completely reserved for people who are democratically accountable. And then the answer is, well, there will be democratically accountable people on there, but not entirely. So that seems to be a no to me.
Yes, that's the point that I was making, and I raised this earlier with officers in our pre-meet, and I think the response was that what was intended was not so much a no as a yes plus. But you're right. I mean, that's what I was flagging up. What they've done is they've said, yes, there will be places for the democratically elected leaders, but that's not the same as saying that they are reserved. So, yes, you know, the fact is we have made that recommendation. That is the answer that we have had. You know, we as a panel have no authority to insist that they do, but we have asked them to, and they've said that they would. So, you know, for us as scrutiny, if they don't, we then have the right and indeed the obligation to turn around and point that out. But you're absolutely right. Yes, the answer is in fact not exactly yes. Councillor Barber.
You're muted, Councillor Barber.
Matthew.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No, I'm still muted.
No, we can hear you.
Excellent. Most people would probably prefer me muted, but I'm not for a moment. On that point, I think Councillor Grant raises a fair point, that they say yes but no. I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't want to revisit the issue, but I think there is a difference to some of those people that are being referred to in the response to the recommendation about universities and LEP representatives may not be elected, and I think as elected representatives we definitely ought to be at the table, but are appointed or hold some other position that should give them a voice in the discussions representing our communities. They are not officers of organisations. They do hold other positions, albeit not directly elected. So personally, I would say that yes, they've addressed the recommendation to ensure that elected representatives are there. I don't think that should be at the exclusion of all others, personally.
Okay. They've got Peter Dragonetti and Alex Postan, and then Bev's got his hand up. So let's take the councillor questions first, and then ask Bev to respond. So Peter Dragonetti, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, if we're having, in addition to elected members, we're having members of lobby groups such as the LEP and the universities who are own substantial land holdings, certainly around Oxford, and will have an interest in things which members of the elected members may not agree with. And I think if we're having representatives of lobby groups, I think they should represent that we should have lobby groups that stand for a diversity of opinion and not just developers. And I would suggest CPRE, for example, being on the growth board, as well as so perhaps as well as the developers. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Postan.
My observation, I don't know if it would be recognised as worthwhile. Let pressure groups attend and discuss, but not vote. Simple as that. Commercially, A shares, B shares, voting shares, non-voting shares achieve this desired result. And university property holdings are gigantic and very influential, and frankly, they have a fiduciary interest in maintaining the best return for their beneficiaries that might not be in the growth board's best interests. And should they have the vote? No.
Okay, some interesting points there. Councillors, if you could remember to put your hand down, please. David Turner.
Yeah, just following on from what the last councillor said, is that I went to a ARC meeting in Milton Keynes a few months ago, and I was absolutely horrified that the entire interest was in the two universities and seemed to ignore lots of other people, and particularly in training. The value of apprenticeships and technical people who turned great ideas into manufacturable products. So I've got a lot of sympathy with what the last councillor said.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to suggest that there's clearly a lot of feeling about this on the panel. I'm going to suggest that I capture that on your behalf in a new recommendation to the Growth Board meeting next week, which essentially repeats the last one, perhaps with the addition of the point that Peter made, that we wish the representatives of our Growth Board to be voting members who are democratically elected. In other words, the same structure as the Growth Board itself. But let's let Bev's been waiting to come in. So Bev, would you like to just respond?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. This is a bit unfair because it's literally hot off the press. The ARC leadership group met today and they've agreed a set of terms of reference, which I still have to have validated through them being shared with all the leaders. But if I can quote from what they considered today, this might help shape your recommendation. As part of that, the structure says, the ARC leadership groups will consist of, and it goes down through the list, and it says the ARC leadership group executive will comprise 3 representative leaders from each of Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority growth boards. So I think it's fair to say that the intention of what you've asked, that clearly in our answer we couldn't commit because it wasn't yet agreed, seems to have been picked up. I think there's no harm in you reiterating, and I was going to suggest, I think your conversation is perhaps going into a different direction around your recommendation, which is talking about absolutely making it clear where the voting sits and where the accountability sits. And I think you may want to, I was going to suggest, but you're going to do it anyways, you may want to rephrase and send in effectively a new recommendation. But I want to give you comfort that indeed the members of the executive will be the elected leaders representing the growth boards. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bev. I mean, I think, I don't know if I speak for others, but I certainly feel like we're sort of slightly walking in the dark here because, you know, I don't really know what this executive is, what powers it has, who's on it, you know, what it does. But I mean, would the panel be content for officers to work up a recommendation that captures what we've been saying, to share that with panel members, and then for me to present that next week?
Yes.
Okay.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. So I think that concludes item 7. That's good. Item 8 is...
Chairman, sorry, before you move to that, there is one more thing I omitted to ask, and that is when we're on the subject of declarations, do any members present have any declarations? Just to double check that.
Yeah, declarations of interest. Don't see any.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
Not at all. No, my fault. Sorry for missing that. Okay, item 8 is Councillor Hudspeth, who I believe is not with us yet. So with your permission, we'll go on to item 9, which is to look at the Growth Board papers for the meeting next week. And we have 2. There's the item 9A is a report on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Oxfordshire housing and growth deal, which is at page 24 of our agenda. This report was written by Bev. Bev is with us, so we'll ask Bev to introduce the report and then take any questions and make any recommendations that the panel wishes. Bev.
Thank you, Chair. Again, good evening. So the report that's before you, I won't go into it in detail. My hope is that you've read it. I guess I really wanted to make sure there was a couple of caveats very clearly understood up front. This is quite a fast-moving sort of agenda. This report was written about 3 weeks ago, so I think it very heavily suggests that this is the early sort of response to the impact on our growth deal program, of which the Growth Board is responsible. The report lays out by section of that deal, whether it be housing and affordable housing, whether it be infrastructure, or indeed the Oxfordshire plan. It sets out what we are seeing, or what we had been seeing, as the impacts, both caused by market, literally complete shutdown, but also some of the uncertainties longer term for whenever we're coming out of the lockdown, or as we're coming out of the lockdown. So I think the report is, I would suggest that the scrutiny panel see this as a baseline report. What we're intending to do is every growth board subsequently, for the foreseeable future at least, will be giving an update as to what we see as the current status, where we are on any of our mitigation strategies or our approaches, and any actions that we feel the Growth Board need to endorse for us to be able to react positively to what's going on. I don't want anybody to confuse this piece of work with the work that's being done jointly through the LEP and the Growth Board, which is the development of a recovery strategy, which is happening up and down the country. That will come, I'm sure, in some future Growth Board meeting that you'll have the opportunity to review. So this was really before a recovery strategy had even been agreed. We thought it would be best at least start to baseline what the impact was. Also, to make sure that you're aware that we're not trying to say and blame COVID for all of our problems. We've got program issues that we're always trying to mitigate, but there are exceptional circumstances clearly here. And for example, I won't go all through them, but I'll give you one example that we only have a 3-year affordable housing program, and I can pretty much guarantee we're not going to meet our target simply because there probably won't be very much affordable housing delivered for months throughout this sort of quasi, end of second year into third year. So we've got to work with government to go, is that right to end that program there, or do we find a way to extend that program through the lockdown, and as we go out of lockdown to be able to improve and build on that? So the report also tries to give you at least as positive a spin as we can on such a terrible circumstances, which is this might be a good opportunity to review where we are generally with the types of things we're doing in the growth deal, and then try to improve on those anyways, because we would have been working towards that as we speak. So last thing I'll say, Chair, is there's a very specific item we've highlighted in the report, though, which was right off the bat, because this was going to impact our engagement and consultation on the Oxfordshire plan, and indeed our engagement in the evidence base of the Oxfordshire plan. It took us some time to figure out whether we were going to have consultants still working or not on our plan, let alone staff. I am pleased to say that the work is progressing, but we have asked for approval and sanction to a 7-month extension to the program. I just want to clarify something, because I know the chair is going to ask me to clarify it anyway, so I'll try and do that now. We had written very early on in this program asking government to consider giving us a full year extension across the full remit of our growth deal. I still feel that's a valid request. We still have not yet had a response. So just to explain, the 7-month extension we're asking for the Oxfordshire plan is inside that 12-month request, not in addition to. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any questions or comments that the panel wants to raise.
Thank you very much. So we've got some hands going up there, but perhaps I can just leap in quickly if I may. It seems to me that we ought to be urging government through our recommendation to the Growth Board to reply to that request. I mean, this is a key piece of information. So I would like to propose that we frame a recommendation that the Growth Board urges government to answer that question. Would that be agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. So hands went up. I hope I've got these in the right order. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. I second your proposed recommendation. Bev's already commented on the 7 months being within the 12 months, so it's not added on to what we've already asked for. I just wondered if you could clarify where the 7 months itself came from. So is that an arbitrary figure, or is that, I assume it's based on some sort of, if you could just clarify where it's come from, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thanks for the opportunity to clarify that. So we looked at several options as to what the impact would be. And what we felt was that there was probably a 4-month impact in terms of us hitting the proper cycles to be able to go to the next formal Reg 18 consultation, which is a statutory consultation period. We did consider going more than 7 months. We did consider going 12 months, but we felt, no, we needed to keep the program as tight as possible because we were already behind on the original target. We also considered whether we could do it quicker. But what ends up happening is, while we only needed a 4-month delay, it actually caused a 7-month delay because all the local elections being pushed into next spring means that the full impact of the PERDA period next year actually downs a lot of the work we'd be doing during the consultation. So in fact, a 4-month extension leads, unfortunately, to a 7-month end of program extension. So, you know, without trying to be too clever about this, we actually only need about an extra 4 months to do the work, but the impact on the program is a total of 7 months because of the need to leapfrog over PERDA to carry on some of our additional work.
Thank you. Alex?
Given that the housing numbers are defined by the Strategic Housing Marketing Assessment, which was challenged and substantial questions about its validity were raised earlier in the previous years, do we not feel that it's incumbent on us to make sure that we have a revised vision and number of a proper assessment of what the housing assessment really is going to be now, both in terms of the inaccuracies of the previous assessment and, most importantly, the effects of what the pandemic has caused and is likely to cause in terms of our behaviour, social activity and commercial activity. I think to go without that is the blind leading the blind. Would it be possible to include that as an amendment to your question, or would it be better just to take this as a verbatim addition to your question?
So a couple of things, I guess, to respond there. I don't really want to get into a schma debate, but I guess I would have to say that the schma was tested several times and actually made it through several times. So I understand there's still people frustrated with schma, but it survived several local plan examinations, and in fact was still being used even as most recently for some of the reviews going on. So while people might not like that, that was actually a pretty solid piece of evidence base. Having said that, we are getting a little bit distant away from schma. It's not particularly relevant for the Oxfordshire plan period going forward. But your substantive point, Councillor, is really, really important. We've got a piece of work that we've been undertaking for the last, I would say, 6 or 7 months through a company called Iceni, working with Cambridge Econometrics to look at what would housing need and housing market look like now. Well, look like pre-COVID. We've asked them to do some extended piece of work to start to speculate to us, well, what is the impact of COVID? Now, I have to say, and I should have said this, maybe the chair can just back me up in saying I was going to say this to you. We've asked for an extension, but I'd be shocked if I didn't come back and ask for another extension at some point, because the reality is we just don't know the full impact of what COVID's going to do to societal change. Lots of speculation. I mean, I've got to say, and I don't need to wind this panel up about it, but I don't know if the impact is less housing or more. I don't know if the impact is more trips or less. I can speculate, but the problem is I have a plan that needs to be evidence-based. And right now that evidence is, well, certainly needs to be justified going forward as to what basis it's going to be on. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to get that work. We're going to take a view as to how relevant we think it is and how much flexibility there is in that work to keep going with the plan, but to keep revising and refining that work as we learn more coming out of COVID. I think the challenge will be ultimately for leaders, for yourselves, are we confident that we have the right number to be able to defend in a public examination? That ultimately will be the test. Right now, I can't say I'm confident about any evidence base, which is why we're taking a bit longer to figure out what is the impact and how much is it going to impact us going forward. The last thing I'll say, Chair, I don't want to take too long on this, but we're also looking at a 30-year time horizon. So the reality is in a 30-year plan, you're going to have ups and downs, peaks and troughs, and sort of step forward, step backward. And I think one of the real difficulties we have in doing this statutory plan, and by the way, I think it's pretty much now one of the last two in the country, is the national policy framework does not help us out because it does not give us the kind of flexibility to have a vision-led document. It still requires as much evidence as a local plan, and yet it plans for twice as long. That is problematic. So I guess I'm laying these down as markers that I might be back to you in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, saying we're not as certain as we'd like to be and we may need more time or more effort. But at this point, we're doing the work, we're doing the studies, we're investigating it further because the point is right that you make. We need to be more certain what the impact going on now is to what we're going to be planning for the future.
Okay, so that was a comprehensive answer. The phrases that struck me there in reply to your answer, Alex, was that this SHMA is increasingly less relevant to the Oxfordshire plan going forward. And also, of course, the plan, the local plans for which it has been accepted as an evidence base run to very much shorter timescales, half of the local plan, in some cases a third. Short periods in planning, in terms of planning and building. David Turner.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I'm looking at item 24 on page 28, and that questions the need for particular infrastructure from the Growth Board and possibly HIF. I'd just like to note that many planning permissions for developments have already been given on the basis of this infrastructure. So surely my question is, we can't go back on that understanding when planning permissions have already been given in the public arena and those decisions made.
I guess the simple answer is I would agree, Councillor Turner. I think the problem is it's not so much us going back on that. I think it might be developers coming in and challenging whether we need that infrastructure anymore. And why should I pay for a piece of infrastructure that clearly nobody's using anymore? These are legitimate questions that planning and transport authorities are asking up and down the country. So really good example, really simple, is developer comes in, if they've got a net impact, they have to pay to mitigate the net impact. If we've just lowered the capacity, or we've improved the capacity of the network by 40%, I know we haven't, but you can understand where the argument's going to be played, is, well, then there's capacity in the network to take our development. That's not going to sit very well with local planning authorities or local transport authorities or indeed the public. And then the second problem is, even if you can rationalize that in your own head, well, what's the mitigation now? Is the mitigation to add another road? Is the mitigation to add another bus? Or is the mitigation to add another cycle lane and a pedestrian way? I think these are just theoretical questions at this point, but I think these are things that we have to think about. And I think your item on this tonight's agenda, OXIS, is going to be incredibly important because it's going to have to look at the prioritization of infrastructure in light of the changes of what we're going through now, which is potentially quite dramatic and very hard to predict. But no, I agree. It's hard to go back on that. I just think the business cases that were built on those are now fundamentally changed. And as viability is still a material consideration in planning terms, it might be hard for authorities to defend some of its infrastructure asks in the past or indeed in the future.
But many planning decisions would not have been made without that promise.
I substantially agree, but yet the planning permission still exists. So the question is ultimately, is a developer better off coming back and challenging the basis of that planning permission, opening up the opportunity to not be given planning permission to try and reduce their cost impact, or are they better just to build it, take the burden and move forward? I think that we just don't have enough examples yet to know where the market's going to go.
Yeah, good point, David. They can't just go ahead without the conditions that were part of the original permission, much though they might wish to. Peter Dragonetti, you had your hand up, but now you don't. Are you wishing to speak?
Yeah, I've taken it down.
Okay, fair enough. Likewise, Craig Simmons, you had your hand up and then it went down, but I think you. It looks like you to another device.
Yeah, no, I got chucked out the call, so my apologies if someone's asked this question. But there was a mention of Oxfordshire open thought. I think in paragraph 36. I'm not sure if anyone's asked a question about that. And I was, normally we have a sort of, consultation strategy, and then we decide what the solutions are for that consultation. So I haven't heard about Oxfordshire open thought and wondered how it fitted into a consultation strategy.
Yes, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's not directly related to COVID, but because it was thought about before COVID. Without trying to make a big long explanation, very simply, the problem we're at right now with our spatial strategy, as I was alluding to earlier, is we are looking at a 30-year vision. The evidence before COVID is it starts to get very thin after about 5-10 years. By the time you're into 15 years, you're starting to make a pretty good calculated guess. By the time you're going 30 years, quite frankly, you are completely guessing. But yet the local plan regime, which is used to basically measure us in national policy terms, means we've got to have an evidence base for another 30 years. And that's very, very difficult to do, maybe even impossible to do. We'll have to see. Some of the more recent inspectors' decisions have been unhelpful in that regard. So we thought one of the ways we could do that, particularly on topics that were of major interest and concern during the initial consultation, climate change, mobility, how people will live, how communities will work, we thought it might be best to go through a non-traditional engagement exercise to try and generate a conversation, maybe even some information, maybe some studies that people have been doing or thinking that people have been doing to help us try to develop the policy in some of those areas where, quite frankly, the evidence is thin. So the open thought process is really trying to generate that engagement. I think the other thing it's trying to do, which is wholly consistent with our consultation strategy, is to try to engage with as wide of audience as possible. And we did give a brief consideration as whether we'd stop open thought because of COVID, but we actually think, no, this would be a really good time to be asking people about what they think about how they live, how they move, and where they want to be going in terms of climate change. So that is going to be launched next week on the 2nd of June. And then certainly you will all be involved in the conversations around that. Members will be getting direct linkages to that to contribute to that as we go forward.
Thank you very much. David Turner, would you mind just lowering your hand?
I actually had another question, Chairman.
Oh, sure.
Councillor Tanner has also indicated he wishes to speak, Chair.
I beg your pardon, David. Has he? I haven't got that
on the chat, Chair.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I can't. That's one of the problems with this is you can't look at both things at the same time. John.
I did indicate.
Sorry, John. I'm sorry. I'm getting used to.
Yes,
John Tanner.
I can't imagine little hand, so I'm having to use the chat.
Yep.
I just want to make the point that when Alex was talking about the SHMAR and the housing numbers and so on, that Oxford City Council's local plan has just been approved with substantial need for housing both in Oxford and outside Oxford's boundaries, approved on its own merits, quite separately from SHMAR, that we were able to convince the inspectors, or they were convinced that there was a substantial need. Now, it does seem to me that when we come out of this pandemic, there's still going to be that housing need. It exists indeed within the pandemic. And if I was a betting person, I would say that places like Oxford are going to perhaps recover, and Oxfordshire are going to recover a bit faster than other parts of the country. I think we need to encourage that. We've got to push at the open door. And so I think really going back to some of the things that Bev was saying a little earlier, we need to encourage investment and to speed it up if we possibly can, so that we want to make sure that, I mean, it's not just a question of houses, is it? But I mean, all kinds of investment in railways and IT stuff and all of that. We'll need, I think, even faster than we've been planning before the COVID epidemic. So, I mean, if I'm wrong and the economy doesn't bounce back in this area, at least we will get the benefit from having that kind of investment. So I think we should go for it and go for it even faster.
Okay, thank you, John. sorry to keep you waiting there. David.
Yes, I'm looking at page 33, Chairman, and item 50, which sort of carries on from what I talked about before. It says discussions with Home England over the possibility of adjusting the parameters of the housing and growth deal to use it as a tool for recovery. Then goes on to say that contact's been made with MHCLG to alert them to the potential impacts on the various work streams of the deal. I wonder if we have any more information about that, what sort of things are being looked at, because, as I said on the previous item I referred to, many decisions have already been made. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, through you, that apologies. There was a reference I made earlier. I should have been made perhaps more robust. In that we had originally asked MHCLG for an extension of 12 months because we anticipated quite a severe impact right off the start of the lockdown measures. That was the initial contact we made with MHCLG. Now, I'll be honest with you, and you may already know this, most of the MHCLG officers who we work with were all disbanded from their current work teams into the response and recovery approach. So, for instance, the whole of the Oxcam ARC team was disbanded. The housing and growth deal team that we work with was disbanded to do other work. So I'm not making excuses for them. They still could have got an email back, and they acknowledged that they got the email to us, but they haven't given us any detail. I suppose there's two reasons for that. My guess, my speculation, one is they don't know any more than we do about the depth of this and how bad this is going to get. So the idea of giving a temporary response, I think they probably want a more considered response. The second thing, though, which may be at the heart of your question, David, is I also don't think we've quite bottomed out how far we might need to go to change the parameters of some of the milestones that we've got. So, for example, we already know we were having problems delivering our infrastructure program within a 5-year period. It causes real harm to us to have a 5-year program because it doesn't make sense to invest in that program after a few years, because by the time you've delivered it, there's no more money coming into the system, but you've got a rather expensive unit developing and designing a capital program. So the perversity of creating a positive story suddenly starts to become a negative story. So what I think is going to happen, but I don't know because I don't have confirmation of it yet, is I think it will open up a new dialogue on how that deal could be working going forward. And I think that's the point when we start talking about different approaches, different kinds of milestones, or indeed a different kind of approach, because ultimately this might not be working. And certainly can't deliver to the existing timelines in any way, shape, or form, frankly. So we wait for that response, and we'll continue, as I think you're pushing in, and I appreciate your urgency as well. We do want some sort of response and timeline as to when we can at least tell the public that MHCLG understands our problems and they've agreed something different than what we're already committed to.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks. I've got Councillor David Grant and then Councillor Dan Levy. David.
Hi. Sorry, taking a few seconds. No, I just had a comment on, it was page 30, paragraph 33. It just said that there are technical limitations when attempting to brief all district and county councillors and answer their questions on the project remotely. These would likely have less success than face-to-face briefings. I think this is all going rather well, actually, all these online meetings, and some of them work sometimes it's quite a lot more civilized than in person. So I don't think we should, the technology's there. We've all learned how to use it pretty rapidly over the last few weeks. I think we should be.
Councillor Grant, you gave reference to the most stale dated paragraph in the report. I think many of us have found that's no longer a weakness of the system. It probably has actually improved our communications. We probably talk more than we ever did before, and we probably got more time to talk than we ever did before. So I think it's a really good example, though. So can we learn from this to build in a higher productivity rate going forward that actually could help us? So I think, again, this report hasn't captured some of the positive aspects of what we've learned through this process, and maybe that's difficult to pronounce given the severity of the problems associated with COVID, but there certainly are working opportunities that could change the structure of how we work in future that I think it could be quite beneficial. I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, Dan Levy.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's fairly clear that COVID will have a major effect, and it's pretty clear, as Councillor Tanner said, that the demands for good things will carry on. So some of the good things that we all want, like better affordable housing, more affordable housing, cycle routes, less car-infested estates, those are all good and expensive things. But as Councillor Postan said, quite rightly, it's likely there'll be a big impact on the numbers of saleable houses and profits to be made by developers. And I'd really just like to flag up that there is a huge gap, because we're expecting the good things to be paid for out of the profits of the developers and the landowners. So that was really an observation, primarily driven by the fact that I'm about to have a garden village built in my ward, and I want it to be a proper garden village and not something that only has the expensive houses built. But also because I think we as a scrutiny committee need to keep on making the case that there is a gap, and if it can't be filled by developers, can it be filled in other ways, by government grants, for example? So I think there is a real issue, and we should keep on stressing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. So we've got David Turner and then Alex Postan, and then perhaps we ought to think about moving on to another item.
Thank you,
Dave.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a comment about communications. I think we have to realise that parts of Oxfordshire are extremely rural. Parts of South Oxfordshire, quite frankly, to send emails is probably quicker to light a bonfire in your garden and send smoke signals. And so it's not as all as sweetness as light as it actually sounds. I've experienced the last few weeks of meetings on Zoom, Skype, and Team, where they've just broken up completely, and I'm getting about half the words of a person speaking. That's a real worry in South Oxfordshire. We've got an examination in public coming up in July, and I'm not sure how that's going to work. Just a comment, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Fair point, absolutely. And just to say that it is built into all the protocols that if anybody is prevented from taking part, for technological reasons, then that is factored into the decision-making process, and there are meant to be safeguards for that. Alex, probably last comment on this one, if we may.
Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. I'd like to support Councillor Levy and the difficulties and the impetus that he has for the garden village in Ensham, which is fulfilling Oxford City's unmet need, which is an interesting concept on its own. But it must be pointed out and remembered, history does tell us that the Black Death took 2 centuries to recover from, and the way it recovered was King Henry VIII took the monasteries, took their money and built the Royal Navy with it. The impetus for infrastructure should not come from the government, our money. It should come from private resources. The private resources that built the British railway network without any government funding. We should be looking as a growth board to recommend the growth board follow private investment and look at the effects of long-term. The Irish potato famine took a century to recover from. Now, history is not wrong in those cases. I've said enough.
Thank you, Alex. Lessons from history. Having said we're coming to the end, I did just want to make one just very brief point myself. Just back to paragraph 14 of Bev's report is about S106 commitments. And it says here, government advised to councils to consider allowing small, medium-sized developers to delay S106 commitments in a bid to support them, and then goes through to how that might be done. I mean, it just seems to me to be another example of government sort of putting all the difficulty onto local authorities, because we're expected to to make delays for good reasons, but those contributions are the ones that local authorities rely on to deliver important things that we're trying to deliver. And then just below that, paragraphs 18 and 19, deliverability is really key in all this. It already was before the current crisis struck. And paragraph 18 talks about deliverability in the affordable housing programme, and about how some registered providers were concerned to reflect upon whether their development contract and the penalties it contains for existing costs is one they could sign up to, which is a very nicely worded way of saying that they weren't signing up to it. And in paragraph 19, it says that fortunately the government agreed to roll over from year 2, so that those payments could be made when the payment milestone was achieved, which of course raises the questions of what happens if it is not achieved. So I mean, I don't want Bev to give us a sort of lengthy answer to that point, but it does seem to me that there already were ongoing challenges and ongoing stresses within the timescales of the deal and the level of grant available to housing providers, which of course have only been made worse, and we hope that this delay will solve it. That's been a really good discussion, plenty of detail in there. I don't think we've actually captured anything in specific recommendation terms, unless anybody would like to.
We're just being asked to support.
Sure.
I think we're just being asked to support the 7-month extension, Chair.
Yeah. Sure. Well, which I take it we're happy to do. Yes. Great. David Turner, your hand is still up. Are you wishing to speak again, or is that just you haven't taken it down?
No, I haven't taken it down, and I've lost that part of the screen, so I don't know how to do it.
I'll just ignore it, and if you want to speak, just wave. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bev. That was a very thorough report. Lots of detail in there. Lots for us to keep an eye on as things emerge. So that was item 9A. We can now go back to item 8. Councillor Ian Hudspeth is with us, is joining us to give us an update in his capacity as chair of the infrastructure subgroup of the growth board, not in any other of his other many distinguished capacities. So Ian, thank you very much for making time to attend this meeting. If you wouldn't mind just giving us an update on the work of the infrastructure subgroup, perhaps in a couple of minutes if you can, that would be very helpful. Without wishing to, preempt questions, I think deliverability and I think deliverance so far is a key aspect. So, Ian.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me along tonight. I mean, obviously you've been discussing, and it was fascinating to hear that sort of section of the debate, because everything is going to be changed completely. And I think that, we're going to have to see what is going to be impacted when we come out of it, if and when we're sort of coming out of it, as it were. I mean, the one thing I must emphasize is that the infrastructure subgroup is not just looking at one particular aspect of infrastructure in Oxfordshire. Obviously, we've been looking at the HIF deals, that's HIF 1 and 2, been monitoring the growth deal as well. And, there are, as we've heard, delays there, which, disappointing as much as anything else, because we should actually be getting on and delivering the funds. And I think that for our reputation, we've got to make sure we do deliver within the timeframes that are specified. Otherwise, next time government have some funding streams, they're going to say, well, actually, you can't deliver what you have delivered in the past, with the funds we already gave you. So I think it's important we stick to those. Oxis, it's up for renewal, refresh, whatever way we want to look at it. That's been an important document for us, because actually it bases on the evidence we already have. And I think that we've just heard Bev talk about the evidence, and that's very key to make sure that if we have the evidence, it's a good recommendation to put the bids in. And going back to the bids, I think one of the important things about those bids, and the reason we're successful, is we had the evidence of all the infrastructure requirements we needed. So that's something that's going to be keeping an eye on. Also, it's blue infrastructure as well. We had some really interesting presentations by the Environment Agency and the work they're doing on the higher level, and it was talking about the need, for water and the resources they've got around there at the strategic level. Plus Thames Water came in as well and gave a very good presentation on their request and what they're planning to do, particularly around sewerage. And I think, you know, in parts of Oxfordshire, there's some real problems because all too often in the plans, we see that there's no comment from the Environment Agency or Thames Water when we know there is an impact coming along, and it's sort of only going to, that demand's only going to get worse. Now, whether they actually translate that into some actions, we'll have to wait and see, but certainly we pressed them on that. Digital infrastructure, which now, and we just heard Councillor Turner say about it, is so important. And, you know, the fact that we are able to swap our meetings completely, would we have been able to do this 5 years ago? Probably not. And so therefore we've come a long way, but we still need to go a lot further to make sure that everybody has a good connection and is able to have access to, you know, good super fast broadband. Transport infrastructure obviously is something that is really important. We've had the rail connectivity study, which was a collaboration between us and the rail industry, looking into what the requirements are across Oxfordshire. One of the key things is the Cowley branch line coming out and highlighting the need for that, which I say I've got a thumbs up from John Tanner, and you know, you know, it's, I think if I remember correctly, it was 2014 that it was the front page of the Oxford Mail where we did the test run down to Cowley, proving that it could be done. And, you know, we're coming up to 6 years. It's really disappointing that we haven't been able to do that, because actually it will be just so beneficial to that side of Oxford to actually have that. Plus, I'll hold my hand up, you know, own local interest, because I just quite like a little train commuting between Hanborough and the Cowley branch line to have that sort of impact, which, you know, would be really good. And, you know, but that's in there, so it's another area that we're working on. Rail connectivity, I know we've got problems at the moment because public transport and the rail companies are working out how to get people back onto trains, but they are the really important. If we're talking about mass travel around the county, around the country, rail infrastructure has got to be the key. And it's that first mile, last mile, which was in the NIC report a few years ago, Andrew Gilligan, how we can access stations. And Councillor Levy talked about Ensham Garden Village. Well, how can we make sure that's as easily connected to Hanborough Station in a sustainable way to make sure people don't have to, you know, don't have the opportunity to get in cars. So that's good. We've got the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which was approved by Cabinet's OCC Cabinet this year. And again, that'll play a key part in moving forward. Obviously, you know, wrapping up with the growth and housing growth deal, I think we've gone through that pretty much and talked to Bev about that, but we're in there, we're looking at that and monitoring the position and feeding back in. And now, as always, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. I'll start then. I don't see any hands going up. Just two things. Just about delivery of projects so far. We are, I believe, now into year 3 of the deal, and there were projects which were due for delivery in year 2. Yeah. Can you give us any sort of update on what has been achieved so far? What's delivery looking like up to this point?
I don't have those figures in front of me, so I'd rather not say. The reports will be coming out.
Okay, thank you. And then just, it was mentioned to me today, I was reminded that this panel some time ago did actually ask, I believe, for a timetable, a Gantt chart. I like a Gantt chart of delivery of the milestones in the growth deal, which we, I believe, have never had. So I think probably, I hope that the panel would want to repeat that request.
Okay, well, I'll ask for it, yes.
Yeah. Okay, any questions for Councillor Hudspeth from the panel? Amit. wants to speak? Amit, you got your hand up.
Yep.
Amit, do you want to speak to the meeting?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to, about the last comment you made, Chair, about the infrastructure milestones, the Gantt chart. I believe the infrastructure projects, the team got back to me on that, saying that they were under review. And as soon as that review has been completed, we should have those figures. That's from the officer end.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or points for Ian on the infrastructure subgroup? No? Okay. Oh yes, there we go. Sean.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if there have been any changes to your remit in light of COVID with regards to cycle routes and getting people out of cars and off public transport, if there was anything new there.
Well, within the remit of the growth board and the infrastructure subgroup at the moment, no, there hasn't been any change there. However, it's always been a key part of it. If you look at the HIF1 bid, for instance, for Didcot, although everybody sort of thinks, oh, this is all about road building, it is providing first-class cycling facilities from both Valley Park and Great Western Park across the River Thames to Culham, which is going to be a growing place. To do that cycle journey at the moment, I would say is pretty challenging, would be an understatement, because you're going over some really old bridges and, you know, the narrow roads. So, you know, I think that one of the things that we haven't been saying is how good the infrastructure will be. And of course, the thing is that with the new Thames crossing, it'll be returning Culham Bridge and Clifton Hampden Bridge back to sort of small rural bridges that can be a pleasant cycle ride over, because there'll be fewer cars. But on the main routes, as I say, from Great Western Park and the 4,500 houses at Valley Park, they'll have a fantastic route going to Milton Park, going to you know, Culham. We're also looking at the project to actually link up down a new bridge, cycle bridge over the A34. So there was lots in there, but there will be a change. We've obviously heard about the active travel funding announcement, which was announced a couple of weeks ago.
But has there been any sort of directive about prioritising or pushing forward those sort of projects?
Well, the projects are in there and they'll be moving forward as soon as we've got the details and the funding, yes. But there hasn't been a directive. I mean, there's been the announcements 2 weeks ago of the active travel, where if we can put in some temporary accommodation to make sure that cycles giving priority and increasing pavements, particularly in relationship to where buses are being frequently used, then that's what the active travel funding's about, and that'll have to be used in the short term on some very temporary measures. But I hope that we'll have some additional funding for longer term measures. And when I say longer term, to pull forward these projects that we've got in the plans.
Thanks. Peter Dragonetti.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's very good to know that you are doing these cycle schemes, but it does appear to me that actually sometimes the devil is in the detail, and they look like I did a look at the details on the say the Science Bridge in Didcot. They appear to be cycle schemes designed by highways engineers. There's one particular cycle route that went along and then it just stopped dead, and resulted in the cycle user having to use a roundabout, which is quite hazardous. I just want to make sure that your cycle routes are actually, use that horrible jargon, sort of fit for purpose for cyclists. It's very easy for highways engineers to do lip service to cycle schemes. I just make the point, just an observation.
Well, can I just make the point back to you on?
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned the Science Bridge. And actually, one of the key engineers on that is a very keen cyclist himself. So actually, he might be a highways engineer, but that doesn't stop him being a cyclist. And an awful lot of these projects and engineers that we have are cyclists and regularly cycle, so they understand what it is. But of course, there's limitations within funding areas, and that's unfortunately where things, particularly retrofitting, it's far easier when we've got as I say, with the new roads that's going to be built for HIF1, it's far easier to put in good facilities now, which are relatively cheap to add on, whereas to actually try and retrofit, it's finding where the land is as much as anything, and that may be the issue there. But I can assure you that there's an awful lot of cyclists who are highways engineers.
Very good. Right. I'm sure he'll pick up my point then. Thank you.
Alex Poston.
Very briefly, Ian, nice to see you. 20% of our population is rural, 80% is urban. And it's right that you should concentrate on rail mass transport and cycleways for the urban needs and the urban population. But in the 20th century, the two great inventions for the rural community were digital communications, IT, and personal transport. The rural communities depend on personal transport, and no amount of railways or cycle routes will solve the needs of those smaller communities. Can that be please taken into account when you start looking at the majority's interest, the urban needs? The COVID may result in different work patterns, which may not mean that so much mass commuting and working hours. Looking after the individual personal transport is vital.
Well, I think perhaps, if people are looking from the urban view, they're saying, well, actually, all we're worried about is the rural view, and why are we building, so it's an argument that unfortunately, as a highways authority, we probably will always struggle with, because whichever view you're looking at it, we haven't necessarily got the perfect system for that particular person, and an awful lot of that is down to the fact of funding. And getting the funding, we've been very successful, getting over £500 million worth of funding into Oxfordshire over the last few years. I'm confident that with Oxis and everything, we can actually get more funding, which will be split between the rural facilities and the urban facilities as well. But in the rural facilities, one of the key things there we should be looking at is improving the digital connectivity, so there's less need for people to actually drive. And then we should also be making it easier for people to have sort of hub and spokes. So as opposed to having a long drive to make, you're actually sort of going on to shorter journeys and then being able to have some public transport of some sort. A bit like I was saying about Ensham Village, that, it's got to make sure there's good strategic transport, public transport links from there.
Thank you. David Grant, and if I could ask Peter and Alex to lower your hand, please. David.
Could you turn your mic on? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just want to sort of half agreed with Councillor Postan, half disagreed with him. So I agree that the rural communities are far too often forgotten about, and actually that's a really key point. But I do think, and personal transport, well, a bike is a personal transport, and actually that can be very useful for rural communities if you give them safe ways to cycle. I'm in Farringdon. I can't cycle to Oxford or anywhere like Wantage or anywhere because it's just not safe. If there was actually a safe a traffic-free route, then you could quite happily, and that would be useful for rural communities as well. I think Councillor Husband picked up on one of the other solutions, which is hub and spoke things. So if you can get to a main road in your car or some other form of transport, then you can pick up transport. But I also wanted to do another thing that I think should be taken into consideration is the use of smart technology for rural communities. So, for example, you may be able to use an app in the future very easily to call up a minibus to say, well, I'm going to here. You get some kind of shared transport from one place to another. So I don't think necessarily I agree with the problem, but I don't think the car is necessarily the solution. It may be part of the solution. It might be impossible to get rid of them altogether, but I don't think it's. I don't think we should stick with business as usual on it.
Well, one of the things about the A420 corridor is we're looking in to see whether we can have mini park and rides. So as opposed to sort of having one big park and ride and everybody driving there, it's actually, can we have some mini park and rides next to good, because you've got the Route 66, which is a good frequency bus service, have them next to that. But also, again, having good cycle links. So you can actually cycle there to make sure people can get there, and at having secure cycle racks by bus stops. I mean, that's another thing I'm very keen on, that have it to make sure that people, if they can cycle to a bus stop, then they've got somewhere secure to cycle it. Demand responsive transport is something that we put a bid in with for the rural transport on Tuesday at Cabinet, which is exactly that sort of idea about having sort of some sort of app or something like that. There was, of course, the Pick Me Up service in Oxford, which is exactly that, demand responsive transport, which unfortunately hasn't proved successful. And, you know, it's a great shame that Oxford Bus Company have put so much money into it, but they haven't been able to make it successful, which was even before COVID. There was the problem. So we've got to be very careful about what sort of services we can and can't provide.
Yeah, quite agree. It was a good service, and I hope it'll, there'll be a way for that model to be revisited. I think Richard Webber wants to speak, although there's no hand, and then Nick Carter. Richard.
Yeah, I don't have a hand. Sorry.
No worries.
Just wanted to pick up on a theme I think I've detected all the way through this meeting, and not just from Ian, but also from Bev. There's a slight feeling of passivity about everything we're doing. There's not much activity, that actually we're waiting for people to do things to us, either government or COVID or developers. And there's been an awful lot of talk about the money we need. And frankly, there's no certainty we're going to get it when we need it. I just wonder whether we ought to be getting on the front foot with what we can actually do now, realistically. That's point number one. Point number two is, in all Ian's presentation, I didn't really hear that the climate emergency had got through to everything he was saying. That actually there was a way of at least apportioning weighting to things in such a way that we could deliver things in some sort of a sensible order, depending on when money was available or what could be done now. I'm just anxious we're getting ourselves in a position of hiding in a cave, hoping there's some solutions to things that are just going to appear for us. I'm not convinced they are.
Well, picking up on sort of the, you say passivity, I mean, until we get the funding, wherever that comes from, we can't do anything. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's one can stand and say this is what we're doing, but the reality is, until the funding comes in, and in Oxfordshire, we have done really well over the last few years. When I talk to my colleagues from other counties, they are absolutely envious that the funding's coming in. But of course, we haven't got the funding yet. And until we get the funding in for the HIF bids, we can't actually deliver that. But I can assure you, as soon as the funding comes in, we are working on it. Yes, the Green Agenda, all the councils have agreed to join up to the climate change agenda. And that is written through all the policies of all of the councils, and that'll come forward through that. So the individual, because we've got to remember that the beauty about the Oxfordshire Growth Board is that sovereignty actually lies with the Sovereign Council, and the Growth Board is not telling the councils what to do. So actually it's in the sovereignty of the local council, each individual council, that's pushing the Green Agenda, and we are doing it. And I think that what perhaps it might sound as if we're being a bit passive, but until we have a clearer idea of what COVID is actually going to do, what the opportunities are for us, we could then be accused in some time in the future of turning around and saying, why did you do that? You've wasted your money. If you'd waited and seen what the result is, then that would have transformed and changed the way you're thinking.
Thanks. Nick Carter.
Yeah, Ian, hello again. There's a subject which I think is highly relevant to all this, but although I accept it's not under your immediate remit, and that is the white elephant known as the expressway. Do you know, have you any idea where we stand on that at the moment? The issue hasn't been parked properly, but what are your feelings about that at the moment?
I mean, the expressway is one of those things that certainly the Bedfordshires and Cambridgeshires of this world are absolutely 100% behind. The mayor of Bedford is absolutely adamant it goes ahead because they see it as improving there. There's obviously question marks in Oxfordshire and there's question marks in Buckinghamshire as well regarding it. At the moment, well, it's one of those things that government may or may not make a decision on it, and we'll have to see what it is if that doesn't sound too passive and sitting on the fence.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a very good politician's answer. Yes, thanks for nothing.
It's very difficult. I mean, it is, as I say, my issue with the whole thing is if they'd come down, and this is something in Buckinghamshire and said, what's your biggest road problem in Oxfordshire? We'd all turn around and say the A34 because it impacts on everything. And if we could find a solution for the A34, it would be really beneficial. And if we could work with Highways England to find a solution to the A34, then if Buckinghamshire could find a solution to their problems, which is mainly having bypasses around Aylesbury, actually, are we talking about then having something locally planned and thought of that then ends up doing another function as well? And I think it's the top-down issue that everybody's concerned about, and the secretive way that things have been going on, and no one's been, it's all these sort of things that just add to the rumour mill. But at the moment, I've got no clear direction on it.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ian, for clarifying the lack of clarity, as usual. Not from you, to be fair, in this instance. So let's sort of wrap this one up then. I think I'd like to suggest that we sort of revisit our recommendation around a Gantt chart and timescales. I hope that's agreeable to the panel. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to capture in a recommendation coming out of this item? Okay, I don't see anything. So thank you very much, Ian, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Seem to be sitting in the car park at County Hall. So
I know, working hard.
Absolutely.
Not sitting at home.
So we agreed at the beginning of this meeting that we would break for the clap for carers at 8, which is in 6 minutes' time. So I think James Skagg is waiting to speak to us about our remaining item, which is item 9B. Do we want to ask him to introduce that item now and then have a break and then come back to ask him some questions? Would that be sensible? Yeah. Okay. James, are you there?
I just say thank you very much. And I've got to go because I'm going to Blaydon Parish Council now.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
James, I don't see you on the list, but I am told you are present.
I think so. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. There you go. Lovely.
Okay. Great. Happy
Brilliant.
listening. So I am here.
That's great. So we've given you a very definite time limit now, or not more than 4 minutes. Is that? Can you manage
right.
it?
Okay. I'll do a brief introduction.
Thank you.
So hopefully people have time to read the report. But effectively, it is a proposed Growthful report for the 2nd of June, which sets out an outline, brief, and scope of work for updating the Oxfordshire infrastructure strategy, which Councillor Hudsworth was just talking about in his summary just now as well. So the original Oxfordshire infrastructure strategy, often shortened to Oxis, was completed in 2017, and as Councillor Hudsworth said, it has helped support funding bids and agreements, including the Housing Infrastructure Fund work and the Oxfordshire Growth Deal in particular. As part of the 2018 Growth Deal, there is a commitment to update Oxis, and the update will also be key in supporting the new Oxford plan by setting out the infrastructure priorities to support policy and spatial development in the Oxfordshire plan. The plan is to update Oxis in 2 stages, linked to the stages of the Oxfordshire plan. So stage 1, to be delivered in draft by the end of this year, would support the first stage Oxfordshire plan consultation early next year, and look to identify and prioritise strategic infrastructure to 2040. That will be followed by stage 2 work, which will look to support the Oxfordshire Plan next stage submission document later next year, and look to identify strategic priorities for infrastructure to 2050 linked to the spatial options within the Oxfordshire Plan. The objectives of Oxis, again, are outlined in the project brief, but effectively reflect the updated growth board themes of environment, health, placemaking, productivity and connectivity, which are obviously also important in the context of the Oxfordshire Plan. And they'll be important in us being able to appropriately update the prioritisation for the infrastructure in particular. Consultants will need to be engaged to undertake the work as they were for Oxis Stage 1, and there is growth deal capacity funding to support that. It's very much to be developed in partnership between the Growth Board members. There's an officer steering group that's been set up with representatives from the districts and county, which will be overseen by the Growth Board Executive Officer Group. And it's also expected that the Growth Board Infrastructure Scrub Group gets regular updates on progress as well. In terms of stakeholder engagement, for the first stage, stage 1, we're very much keen to ensure that we engage with the right infrastructure providers to get the evidence to support the update, such as utilities. We talked about broadband tonight, education and other areas, to ensure that we've got the right information to update the strategy, but with wider engagement on the outputs of stage 1 at early next year, alongside the consultation on the Oxfordshire Plan, getting that feedback to finalise the stage 1 report following that. And again, talked about earlier in respect of Bev's report, we really need to understand. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll need to break. Sorry to interrupt you in mid-flow there, James.
My last point, what I was going to say was COVID-19, but I don't need to say much more, really.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. If you don't mind just rejoining us, we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
I suggest everyone turns their cameras off and mutes.
Yeah, but don't turn the system off. It was a God's own game getting in.
Yeah. Don't turn the system off, please.
Okay, can we reconvene? Just like a steer from officers that we're safe to go.
Yes, I think so, Chairman. I've just remind everyone that we put everyone's mics on mute before we went for the break, so you might need to turn them back on again.
Thanks very much. And I've just been asked just to confirm, just for the sake of completeness, that Councillor Barber left the meeting a little while ago, and during the break, Councillor John Tanner and Councillor Craig Simmons have also left the meeting. Was there anybody else?
I had about a 5-minute disappearance where it just kicked me out and I had to re-register back in. David Turner.
Yes. Okay, so thank you very much, James, for being so speedy with your introduction of the Oxfordshire report, and indeed for the report itself. I see no questions coming yet. No doubt everyone's still getting their cup of tea. So I'll start, if I may. Thank you for the report, which is very interesting. The one that I was interested in, the aspect that well, among other things, is the criteria for allocating projects to be funded through the infrastructure strategy. Paragraph 8.1 of your report, so I can find it now, refers to a refreshed scoring matrix. And the point that I would like to make here is the preference for clear eligibility criteria based on locally identified need. In other words, that projects that are funded through the infrastructure strategy are needs-based rather than funding-based, so that the need comes first rather than what the funding has been allocated for. I mean, I take it that that's what paragraph 8.1 subsection 4 does, but if you wouldn't mind just commenting on that.
Sure, yes. This came out quite strongly in the scoping work that we've been looking at today, is how we, yes, as you say, refresh the scoring matrix and the prioritisation process for infrastructure to be more needs-based, in line with the principles that are coming through in relation to the Growth Board and in particular the Oxfordshire Plan, and aligning those properly. I have to say that's something that we'll need to work through in more detail as we get to the consultancy brief and also engagement of the consultants, but certainly that's very much in our mind that we need to think how we identify that particular point around identifying the needs for infrastructure, not necessarily just a list of infrastructure as such.
Thank you. Put something in the chat here. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I still see no hands up, so I'll ask one more question, please, if I may, which is paragraph 6 of the actual report itself, as a covering report. I find it now. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Progressive Oxis will have the oversight of the executive officer group of the Growth Board, which you mentioned, supported and monitored by a cross-authority steering group. Just picking up on a theme that this panel has returned to more than once. Where does the democratic oversight of that group sit?
The executive officer group, or? Yeah.
And of the, it mentions cross-party working group, a cross-authority.
Okay. So the steering group is a steering group of officers from the district and county councils, but it's very much anticipated that those people would be the conduits of information in terms of updates for the study back to their authorities to make sure that they're updating their members appropriately. The other side of situation in terms of updating members on progress is through the infrastructure subgroup of the Growth Board, and ensuring that those members who've expressed obviously an interest and engagement on infrastructure matters are kept up to date. And I think there's about four meetings of that infrastructure subgroup and the run up to the end of the year, and then clearly we can update them as well as we undertake stage 2. It is planned that once stage 1 goes through an engagement process early in the year linked to the Oxfordshire plan, then it would come back for endorsement through the Growth Board process. But clearly, as a key bit of evidence base for the Oxfordshire plan, there is obviously the sign-off process for the Oxfordshire plan that is going through with each individual authority, and the need to endorse that plan and associated evidence base at the end of the process as well.
Yeah, and I did notice that your report is based on the revised dates that are proposed in Bev's report, so it sort of presupposes that change will occur. Yeah, just sort of coming back to a theme that this panel has made again. You know, I did ask you specifically about democratic oversight and reporting, and you used a phrase that the officers would be the principal conduit back to their elected authorities. That's the sort of phrase that I think, you know, makes some of us a little bit nervous about the robustness of that oversight and reporting process, and our ability to ensure that it is done. We have found before that when the Growth Board has adopted procedures for reporting back to councils, some have done it better than others. In fact, some have done it and some haven't done it at all. So we might, as a panel, wish to capture that in a recommendation. Alex.
I've been looking quite hard now that I've been officially appointed by my district council to be Ted Benton's replacement and a representative on the Scrutiny Board panel. I'm trying to find a statement of intent for the Growth Board as a whole, its primary objectives, and I've not actually found, if you like, chapter and the words, because I'm nervous that we can get diverted away from what we're trying to achieve by important but peripheral interests. Where would I find that?
The Growth Board itself, I'm not so to speak for it, but it is undertaking, I believe, a review of its terms of reference and its operating principles. I don't know who would be in a best place to speak to that and answer that question. Maybe Beth.
Chair, yes, you. We have undertaken that review, and we're into the implementation stage of that review, and included in that is actually a statement of our intent, interestingly enough. So what we can do is we can certainly share that on in terms of our purpose with Councillor Poston, you know, offline, if that's okay. Or happy to share it through the whole of the group with the minutes. We're happy either way. But I think if the point was raised, I don't know if it was, but if it was raised in relation to Oxus, I think it's important to understand that when you read that, it'll talk about how we are trying to capture the benefits of growth to benefit our communities now and in the future. Infrastructure plays a very significant role in that, and the prioritization of infrastructure linked to that attempt to manage the impact of growth, if that's another way of expressing it, is quite important and quite fundamental. But I'm not sure if the question was aimed towards getting divergent away from our central purpose through Oxus, or if that was just a general comment. I'm not sure, but we can certainly share that purpose with everybody after the meeting.
May I come back through the chair?
Yes, Alex. Yes, go ahead.
Would it be unfair to ask that we make a recommendation that your terms of agreement, terms of reference, and future objectives are agreed and circulate it back to the scrutiny panel and listen to their response before you make a decision to publish and formulate your actual terms of reference. I think that's absolutely crucial.
Can I just be clear, Chair? That is exactly how we would act. Any decision taken by the Growth Board does come via the scrutiny panel. It has ever since it was set up, Councillor.
Yeah.
So I just want to assure you that any decision the board takes or any reports the board hears comes via this group as well. So we would make sure that that's always the case.
That's good news. Thank you.
Chair, if it's okay, I wanted to come back on the previous speaker when it's appropriate.
Yes, go ahead now. Sorry, Stefan, did you want to just comment on that process issue, or you put your hand up and taking it down again?
Sorry, I was just going to say exactly what Bev said. So that's all.
Great. Okay, sorry, Bev, interrupted you. Go ahead.
That's always reassuring. I'm always nervous if I've said something wrong. So thanks, Stefan. That's good. It was about the democratic accountability point, and I'm anticipating a recommendation coming here, and I just wanted to make sure that the conversation is shaping up the way you want it to. I think there is a point, and it'd be good if James clarified, because I thought I heard, but maybe I got it wrong, that the infrastructure subgroup would play a role in the scrutiny of the Oxis as it goes through the process, and ultimately any approval of any draft stage of Oxis as it is being paid for by the Growth Board would ultimately be approved by the Growth Board or presented to the Growth Board. And again, on its way to the Growth Board, it would come via this group. I just wanted James to confirm that. And if your recommendation is you want something beyond that democratic accountability, fair enough. But I just want to make sure, James, you're clarifying what we think that process is now. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Bev, I think you're right. I think you set it out perhaps a bit more clearly. But yes, the infrastructure subgroup would oversee the development of Oxis as it is proposed. But any endorsement of Oxis would have to come back to the Growth Board, and as you say, would go through the scrutiny panel on that process.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
I'm just making the point that the steering group would help to provide a wider update within their organisations as the development of the study is ongoing.
Yes. Okay. Would it be fair to ask you the same question as we put to Councillor Hudspeth about delivery so far? So this, when the infrastructure strategy was first produced and it's now being revised, what is it achieved on the ground?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I can give you specifics, but I could say that a lot of the schemes that were prioritised in the first Oxis have had confirmed funding allocated to them. Clearly, I mentioned in the report the growth deal schemes. There was a number of growth deal schemes that were in there that have had growth deal monies allocated to them, but also the Housing and Infrastructure Fund schemes as well that are currently being developed. So I think there is a number of schemes that have already had funding confirmed or are in the process of development towards delivery. And I know that Councillor Hudspeth mentioned, for example, the large schemes in DIGCOT associated with the Housing and Infrastructure Fund, and they've recently been out to consultation in terms of the scope of those schemes to go forward to delivery. So there has been a number of schemes. But I wouldn't be able to give you specifics of which exact schemes identified in the original Oxis have now been funded or delivered. But that's certainly something that we would be looking at in the first stage of Oxis to review what schemes have been delivered, and then looking at where there are gaps or still gaps in the infrastructure required to support that growth going forward, particularly in the Oxfordshire Plan context.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew Down.
It's your start. Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. For those who don't know me, my name's Andrew Dunn. I'm employed at South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse. Just to add to that comment on the achievements of Oxis, I think some of it is a little bit more tenuous, but very real, in that the very existence of Oxis has been a key factor in securing HIF money and growth deal money, because it was a demonstration to national government that Oxfordshire had thought very carefully about what its infrastructure needs were and was able to prioritise. So you could point to some specific schemes, but I think just the existence of Oxis in itself has been hugely beneficial to our profile.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I see no more hands, which is good. Do we want to capture the point about democratic accountability in a recommendation? Bev has looked at it carefully, so we would, that probably gives us a flavour of the answer we would get, but would that be the wish of the meeting?
Could we add
okay
objectives and first principles as well?
Yes, and could we also accept Bev's offer to circulate the draft terms of reference and the document that he referred to the members of this panel? Yes. Thank you. And then I just would like to propose to the panel that we express our support for the principle enshrined in paragraph 8.1 brackets 4 about the refreshed scoring matrix to prioritise the emerging priorities of the growth board led by the environment. Would that be the wish of the meeting? Okay. Richard
Councillor
Webber.
Dan.
Yes, sorry, who's that?
Yes,
Kevin.
thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Richard, go ahead. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
You made a point. You made the point at the beginning, Chairman. I didn't want it to get lost.
Yep.
About the needs-led versus funding-led approach to priorities and weightings. There's room there surely for a recommendation from this panel, isn't there?
Yes.
Could you put it into words so we can vote for it?
Yes. Well, I think you've just done it very well, haven't you?
Oh, okay.
Go on. You do it, Richard.
Okay. The panel believes that in sorting out its priorities, it should be needs-led as opposed to funding-led.
Yeah, and I'm sure officers will. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure officers will add that out a bit. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. That's been really interesting. Thanks very much, James, for attending late in the evening. That's been a good.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah. So we're nearly there. The next item on our agenda is item 10, which is the work plan and forward plan, but it also contains a substantive item, which is that at a previous meeting, we asked for a paper on the definitions of affordable housing adopted by the various planning authorities, the districts in our region. Paul Staines has supplied that, and it forms an appendix to item 10, so it's right at the end of our agenda. And Paul is with us, so thank you very much for providing that, Paul. And I'd like to just ask the meeting if anybody has any questions. We'll take that bit first. I hope that's okay, Amit. Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments for Paul about the affordable housing definition paper?
I think it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've saved yourself the from the peril of being questioned by giving us a very good paper there, Paul.
Thank you very much.
I did just, if I may, I just wanted to pick up something just to really make sure that I've understood it. We're talking about the different definitions that are, legally available to be adopted, and about how our various councils do that. Paragraphs 13 and 14, you refer to Oxford City and to West Oxfordshire, but I don't think I saw reference to definitions adopted in the other districts. Am I right about that, or have I just missed it?
Chair, I offered those two as examples of one, a council in Oxford where I knew some degree of formality had taken place, and in West Oxfordshire where I knew that there were some discussions going on about that. That's not to say that there aren't similar discussions going on in the office of Cadre and the other councils. It's just that I wasn't aware of them.
Understood. Okay, Peter Dragonetti.
Yes, I just I was interested in, and thank you very much for this paper. It's really helpful. I hadn't appreciated that the setting events for affordable housing is up to the local authority to define. So that's really helpful, and look forward to exploring that issue further, particularly in light of the SODC local plan, which is so going forward, and I'd like to look more at affordable housing. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So are there any other questions or comments for Paul there? Okay, looks like that's a no. So thank you very much, Paul. Sorry we'll get you waiting rather a long time for a brief contribution, but as I say, that's because you've given us such a good paper.
Thank you very much.
So the other part of item 10 then is our work plan and forward plan. The action log contains the action to ask Paul for that report, which we've just had. So that's good. So Amit, would you like to just talk us through the work plan, please? If there's anything for you to say, don't have to.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do apologize. There must be some static on my end, so I've kept myself on mute for quite a while now. Yes, panel, we've got a few items on the upcoming meeting on the 15th of September, 2020. The first item is the growth board review. This again is the work undertaken by Bev and Stefan in order to review the draft terms of reference. So one of the recommendations today was from Councillor Postan, which was to notice of intent, which I think is pretty much the revised draft terms of reference and the review hand in hand. So I think that is in the pipeline. Then another item is the Oxfordshire Plan 2050 update, as we've already discussed the extensions today, the 4-month and the 7-month extension to be included, and our support to do that. So that's upcoming as well. And I think one of the most vital going forward post-COVID world would be supporting Oxfordshire's tourism and visitor economy, which is quite a challenge, I can imagine, in current circumstances. So that's another item that's on the agenda for the 15th of September. And as usual, we'll be getting the Q4 housing and growth field progress report and financial summary. And lastly, the Oxford to Cambridge ARC update, as and when things progress. Other than these items, if there is anything that the panel or panel members wish to put on the scrutiny agenda for the next meeting or any of the future meetings, please just email me, Kevin or Stefan or anyone in the team, and we will try and put that in the pipeline for you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit. And just to wrap up, our final item is item 11, which is dates of future meetings, which on this occasion is not just noting them because Stefan has an update for us. So, Kevin, do you want to just mention well, you introduce it. There are some changes, aren't there?
Yes, Chairman. So on the the dates of meeting item that's at the front of the agenda, there is a general kind of rephrasing around or reprofiling of the dates to take account of what's changing in the growth board world around quarterly reporting, or certainly what was changing pre-COVID. Perhaps I should caveat that. So I point that out, and we being the administrators will be sending out sort of revised meeting date requests. I don't think we've done that for all of these meetings yet. The only other thing I was going to flag was the which had been referred to earlier around the potential, very probable need for a date, an extra meeting in July, as there's going to be a growth board meeting. I'll just pass on to Stefan just to talk if he wants to comment on that bit in particular. But that's all I got to say otherwise. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Stefan?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, this is very early news at the moment, but we are looking at an additional growth board date in July. Obviously, there is a lot going on with the COVID-19 pandemic and developments happening quite quickly with the ARC. So we feel like it'd be a good opportunity to hold another meeting and to make sure that we're getting that out into the public domain, and there will obviously be an opportunity for the scrutiny panel to review reports in the normal way to that meeting. So as soon as we've got the dates confirmed, we'll get those out to you as soon as possible. But this is we still need to scope exactly what it is that will be going to those meetings in a very short space of time.
Yeah, thanks. David?
Yeah, just on the dates, there is an examination in public of SODC's local plan in July and August, so if you could avoid those dates.
We'll certainly do our best.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I believe that concludes our business, unless anybody's going to put up a hand. Okay, officers. Great. Well, can I just finish then by just repeating my thanks to officers for what has been a remarkably smooth and businesslike meeting. So, thank you very much. Meeting in.